Before the carnage that we have seen play out in Israel quite recently, I used to be a supporter of a two-state solution. But now my mind is changed and transformed by the facts of the matter, and I am cemented in my moral support for the people and the state of Israel. I already know this video is not going to be popular with some of my followers. I also already know this video is going to get me a lot of scornful attention from the various different tribes whose entire political existence is dedicated in some way, shape, or form to a criticism of the Israelis or of the Jewish people in general. I understand that, but I have to follow my conscience, and that's precisely what I intend to do in this presentation. Now, before I go any further, allow me to say something that needs to be clarified so that no one can misinterpret the intent and the message of this video. I am not arguing for United States military or financial intervention in between the conflict with Israel and Palestine, even though the United States is one of the largest contributors to the Palestinians, monetary-wise, and also America gives a lot of money to Israel as well. Even though America already is in the situation, I do not support continued involvement in that. Just like I don't support continued involvement of America in Ukraine. I don't support American involvement in Taiwan, because I believe that nations, by virtue of their existence, have the indispensable right to preserve themselves as a first principle. A nation that cannot preserve itself is a nation that will not exist for very long, so the principle of nationhood requires self-preservation. And just like I believe that America must preserve itself by taking care of its people, its borders, its interests, I also believe that Israel must preserve itself by taking care of its people, its interests, and its borders. Hence the case for me as an American providing moral support to Israel. Hamas, which is an Islamic terrorist group that has the popular appraisal and approbation of the people of Palestine, particularly of the Gaza Strip, launched an attack on southern Israel not too long ago, which then culminated into a larger attack of over 5,000 rockets. That's an estimate. Launching into civilian areas in Israel, Tel Aviv, launching into southern Israel. They also sent jihad squads out to the homes of Israelis. Individual Israelis knocked down doors, shot people, massacred grandmas, took the bodies of soldiers and paraded them in front of the streets, dragging them through them like a bunch of wild animals. They've also killed, according to estimates, killed and captured both Europeans and Americans. A German girl, this is actually a famous story, a German girl who was at a rave party for peace on the border between Gaza Strip and Israel was actually killed and paraded around in the Gaza Strip like an animal as an example of the Hamas's ability to jihad. This is a conflict of monumental proportions, and Israel has to defend itself. Now, these events have caused a lot of divisions on both the world stage and amongst political tribes in political discourse in the West. Various Arab countries, such as Iran, which actually not only approved, but has been funding Hamas as a terrorist group, and also approved their attack on innocent civilians in Israel, and other countries in the Arab world, have actually been promoting and supporting what happened and blaming Israel for Hamas's attack. Now, before the events of the recent time transpired, there was a skirmish, an incident at a mosque that supposedly offended Hamas and made them want to go and do this kind of counterattack. And I'll just say this. I don't care what ethnic or religious skirmish happens at one of your holy sites. That does not give you the right to butcher innocent people that had absolutely nothing to do with that skirmish or anything to do with your grievances. To say that Hamas is justified in launching rockets hundreds of miles away from where this supposed incident happened, killing innocent civilians, killing grandmothers at bus stops because they had a skirmish at one of their holy sites, is tantamount to saying that any nation is justified at killing anyone because there are people that did something in a particular area so they can kill everyone like those people. That makes no sense. Justice must be proportional. And I don't care how many of you may say that in wartime, proportionality doesn't matter, survival matters. No, because in wartime, you know what else matters? Ethics matters. If you don't conduct war ethically, or at least try to, because of course in war, there's always collateral damage. And this is the virtue of the Israelis. The Israelis have done their best to ensure that their collateral damage is minimized. Of course, it doesn't always happen, doesn't always, war is always very messy, and sometimes the Palestinians put innocent civilians into houses, and the Israelis launch airstrikes on those houses, and then the Palestinians say, oh, you just killed innocent civilians. And then Israel is called a terrorist state. The UN comes out and says Israel is occupying the land that they're in, they're being cruel, and Israel is made an international pariah simply for committing an act of self-defense. This is the kind of song and dance that happens. And this is the kind of song and dance that is happening right now within the international community and also within political discourse. There are different tribes in the West, political tribes, that are conceptualizing this conflict differently. On the libertarian right, which is closer to where I am normally, but on this issue I guess I'm not, on the libertarian right, they are entirely making this conflict a matter of power dynamics. They are saying that both sides, in pursuit of conflict and pursuit of their goals, are bad and atrocious and have done terrible things and must be condemned uniformly. On the sort of third positionist, identitarian right, which is a much more visceral kind of political ideology that very much believes, and I'll just be frank with you, they believe that national identity in terms of race and ethnicity are more important than universal principles, and that identity should then be transposed into policy. They would say, many of them don't like Jews at all. People like Keith Woods and Nick Fuentes, they themselves say that Israel has committed a long history of ethnic cleansing, and this is simply a response to that ethnic cleansing, and any attempt to paint Israel as the victim in this case is just propaganda by, they believe the media, which they also believe are controlled by people that support Israel. Even though, if you look at the support for the boycott, divestments, and sanctions, which is a movement by pro-Palestinian activists to basically destroy Israel for defending itself on the basis of some false occupation, which we'll address in a second, that's not true, because there's popular support for that within the media and within the left. But that's besides the point. Then you have the left. People like Cori Bush and the Squad and other folks in America and other figures throughout the West that fundamentally believe also that this is a matter of power dynamics, a matter of a marginalized group, in their instance, the Palestinians, being occupied by an aggressor group, and that it's a matter of equity to ensure their liberation. They phrase the actions of Hamas in terms of liberation from a foreign oppressor. This is why democratic socialists, the democratic socialists of America, marched in favor of Palestine in New York, and in a tweet announcing their march, basically said it is okay to carry out these actions in the name of liberation, in the name of defense. People like Gretchen Whitmer in America and Cori Bush have said that both sides, they've condemned both sides of the conflict. They've been mealy-mouthed and double-minded about this. And there has been this talk of moral equivalency between Israel and the forces that it goes up against. And I have been called, for my support, my moral support of Israel, I've been called a Zionist, I've been called ignorant, I've been called many things by many people, all over the spectrum. People, and it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind because of my reading of the facts of history, which I believe is the correct reading, because I'm just looking at the facts. It is clear to me that this conflict is not being talked about in the correct way. When the argument is made that Israel is an occupational force, and by the way, this is mainstream narrative. The United Nations, the very country that had a role in the statecraft that both formed Palestine and Israel, the formal designations thereof of both those nations, they even say that Israel is occupying the Palestinian territories in the Gaza Strip. But of course, occupation implies, or at least in some sense implies, that a sovereignty of the people being occupied. If you don't own something, how can someone occupy it from you? Occupation, in the military sense, implies that the territory was held by some other person. In other sense, that territory was politically owned. And this is the great confusion of so much of the conversation surrounding the Israel and Palestine conflict. The fact is, Palestine, for the vast majority of history, up until yesterday, up until about 90 years ago, was considered a geographical designation. In fact, before the Romans, who called it Palestinia, Syria Palestinia, called it that area was considered to be Judea, a Jewish area. Palestine is a geographical designation that doesn't even, by the way, have any person called Palestinians in it, if you understand that Palestinian is simply another term for the Arabs that inhabit that region. The term itself, Palestinian, makes no sense in the historical context because there has never been a country named Palestine in that area of the world. There has never been an ethnicity called Palestinian in that area of the world. These are all fox inventions of European statecraft in warring feuds and powers that go back thousands of years and culminated in the last 90 years that we have all accepted, or many have accepted, especially on the anti-Israel side, as gospel truth when they are everything but. If we look at the so-called occupied territories, we already established there was no nation called Palestine. There were Arabs and there were Jews, and for a very long time, going back to Richard the Lionheart, going back before then, Arabs, Jews, and Christians have fought over the constitution of the region, now known as Israel, and also now known as the Gaza Strip. They have fought, and not a single group has formally established political authority throughout the entire history of that region that is named Palestine. Now, for 700 years, the Ottoman Empire owned that area that is called Palestine, the geography called Palestine. And for those 700 plus years, the Ottoman Empire didn't establish a country called Palestine. Palestine was established by European designation. After the Ottoman Empire fell in World War I, the League of Nations got together, gave Britain so much authority, and Britain, who beat the Ottoman Empire, divided up the lands to say, okay, the Israelis get this, the Arabs get this is mandatory Palestine, but eventually that came to an end. And when that mandate came to an end, even before that mandate, there was a lot of conflict and squabbling. But when that mandate came to an end, what happened? Well, Israel, after the mandate came to an end, declared independence, said we are a nation now. And then immediately, the Arab powers like Jordan and Egypt and others engaged in the Arab-Israeli war and began attacking Israel in the late 1940s, after it had been established by the British-Palestinian Mandate. And guess what? Eventually, there was a ceasefire. And in that ceasefire, the area now known as the Gaza Strip was given to the Egyptians. The Egyptians held that area from the late 1940s to like the late 1950s, early 1960s. And that was the area. The Egyptians, Arabs, occupied the Gaza Strip. More wars happened. More conflicts happened. I'm being very brief in how I explain this, of course, because I'm not trying to bore you with the history lesson, but this must be said. And eventually, Israel managed to, due to attacks and provocations by the Egyptians and others, managed to take back over that strip of land. And not only that, after they did that, in the 1970s, Israel did their best. They set forth a framework to ensure the Gaza Strip was an autonomous region. So Israel has not only abandoned that area that is so-called occupied several times and tried to give it back to the Arabs, they have done everything they can to ensure that the claims of the Arabs in that area have been met with some kind of reception. You may say that, they didn't go far enough, or they're not doing enough, and you may say a bunch of things. But one thing is clear. Israel has tried to wash its hands clean several times of that damned 20-plus mile area called the Gaza Strip that so many people are calling occupied. The West Bank is more complicated because the West Bank, guess what? Several faiths have claims to there. Islam does, Christianity does, Judaism does. And so, what happened? The West Bank was split into several parts, A, B, C. A is almost entirely controlled by the Palestinian authorities. Then B and C is a little bit more complicated than that. But here's the point. What if the Palestinians, if we establish that Palestine was never a nation, Palestinian is not even an ethnicity, it's a geographical designation, given in ancient history by Rome and then formalized by Britain, how can we say that the Palestinians are under occupation when that term doesn't even make any sense and has no historical validity to it? What occupation? What occupation are you talking about? This is what boggles my mind. Has there been fighting between warring factions? Yes. But guess what? There have been several instances, the Oslo Accords, all kind of things, that have both parties have tried to come together to ensure peace. But what has been the wrench in the plans of this peace process? Very simply, it has been Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization funded by Arab powers like Iran that in its 1988 charter quite literally says that they will not stop until jihad against, they call it the Zionist, Israel, is complete. You don't believe me? I will read from Hamas's charter. The first sentence of Hamas' charter says the following: Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just like it obliterated others before it. That's the preamble. Then they go in to say that the area that Israel has, which they call Palestine, is actually Muslim. Now, they don't make a legal claim. They make a religious claim, a spiritual claim. We're going to address the significance of that in a moment. They say that the land of Palestine is an Islamic holy possession consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. No one can renounce it or any part, or abandon it or any part of it. They go on to say in Article 13, Palestine is an Islamic land. Since this is the case, the liberation of Palestine is an individual duty for every Muslim wherever he be. And they go in to say, in Article 13, talks of peace initiatives. They go on to say explicitly that they don't want peace at all. Hamas says the following in Article 13 of their charter: peace initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. Those conferences are no more than a means to appoint the infidels as arbitrators in the lands of Islam. There is no solution for the Palestinian problem except by jihad. Initiatives, proposals, international conferences are but a waste of time and exercise in futility. Now, as I mentioned, the Camp David Agreement in the late 1970s between Israel and Egypt, which set into motion an attempt to make the Gaza an autonomous region, is also explicitly condemned by Hamas in this charter. In Article 32, Hamas says the following: Egypt was to a great extent removed from the circle of struggle against Zionism through the treacherous Camp David Agreement. The Zionists are trying to draw other Arab countries into similar agreements in order to bring them outside the circle of the struggle. Leaving the circle of the struggle against Zionism is high treason, and cursed be he who perpetrates such an act. The primary voice for the so-called Palestinian people, which is not even a term, that's a false term, the Arabs that happen to be in the Gaza Strip. The primary voice, because these are the people that have elected Hamas time and time and time again, is saying, not that there's a legal claim or a strong basis of nationhood in that area, it's a religious claim. And if you look at the charter, they go on to say that it's religious because Muhammad walked these lands and past Muslim territories, crusaded these lands. Therefore, the land is divinely owned by them, by the Palestinians, by Hamas, by the Arabs. Now, again, how do you establish occupation if you can't first establish ownership? Answer me that. You can't. Because ownership, I view ownership, property ownership, which is the basis, the first principal basis of everything, including man's right to defend his life, including nationhood. Ownership is identified by a line of succession. Whose hands traded what? Whose hands changed what? There is no line of succession between the Palestinians or any other power, because Palestine was never a nation. The term occupied territories is a misnomer, an error in thinking, an emotionalism, a sentimentalism, born from a religious idea of ownership, not a concrete idea of ownership. So if we can establish that there's no concrete idea of ownership present in this conflict, and that both sides, both Israel and Hamas, believe that they are owed the land due to religious providence, then anyone calling it occupied has to take one of two positions. Number one, they have to say that they are going to endorse a particular religious framework, either the Jewish one or the Muslim one in this case, and then use that as the basis for their idea of ownership. Or they have to say that they're going to reject both kinds of ownership and find some other idea to justify the idea of occupation. The second approach, given the historical facts, is not tenable. The first one lapses into relativism. So we have to really ask ourselves, if you can't establish ownership, you cannot establish occupation in any meaningful sense of the word. The truth is, many of the Arab forces in the area that Israel currently occupies, in Israeli territory, are hell-bent on its destruction. They will not bow to peace. They do not want peace. When Israel, as it has a history of doing, as I mentioned before, withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, a day after that, Hamas fired rockets, and they kept firing rockets. And that caused more conflict, that caused more chaos, that caused more nonsense, and these events have led up to the chaos of the day. Now, the reason I don't support American intervention is because American intervention is one of the reasons why the situation has gotten so worse. If you look at what Bush did after 2006, when Bush and Condoleezza Rice and his surrogates tried to install an anti-Hamas government into that region, in the Gaza Strip, by funding them weapons, all that did was simply embolden Hamas, cause American supplies to fall into the hands of Hamas, and make the existence of Israel more in danger than it had before, because Bush wanted to leave his term in office with an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal, which he tried to enforce through foreign meddling and interventionism. So no, America should not get involved in this, because I believe that only does not serve the interests of the American people, but it also fundamentally hurts America. But there's absolutely no way to establish Palestinian ownership. But in my opinion, there is absolutely a way to establish Jewish ancestry, Jewish ownership of that entire area. But those two things are kind of besides the point. The point is, Palestine and Israel are results of European statecraft. And within that context that we exist right now, we exist in the context of the failures of European statecraft. We have to now consider the foundations of both nations in the proper context. And when one nation constantly elects and approves by mass approbation a terrorist organization whose charter literally says that jihad is the only way they will relent to anything, which then means the massacre of Jewish people, and the other nation has shown a tendency to build, has shown a tendency to allow other faiths to inhabit areas, has shown a tendency to have principles of Western Republic liberalism, has shown so many things that are actually good, we have to ask ourselves, which nation is more moral? As Sam Harris pointed out, there is no moral equivalency between the Palestinian lands, I hate that term, between the Gaza Strip, the forces, the jihadists occupying the Gaza Strip, and Israel. There is none. One country is committed, largely, to ensuring that collateral damage is minimized. When Israel retaliated against the recent attacks, what did they do? Netanyahu basically told the civilians of Gaza, get out, please get out. Whereas the other will go in and blow up buildings, they'll go in and blow up civilians, they'll go in and kill people. And please, don't do this whataboutism. Don't do this, well, Israel did it too. Here's the thing. Everyone has to stand account for their own sins. And for someone to make a point that the Islamic terrorist, whose first principles quite literally mention jihad, the destruction of Israel, so for someone to indict them does not mean that you can't have a conversation about anything else, but it also means that they have to stand account for what they did. The whataboutism is mere deflection created by minds that don't want to reckon with the situation in front of them. And why people do this, I have no clue, and that's not my goal. But I do understand, if we are evaluating this, I know I'm going to get criticized for this too, through the lens of morality and philosophy, sound philosophy. It seems evident to me that the Israeli people are justified in their struggle against these illiberal forces that seek their utter annihilation. And it seems even more evident to me that moral support from people who also appreciate these principles might be encouraged. I'm not talking about military support, financial support, but it might be encouraged. And it seems even more evident to me that a nation that elects a political force whose very charter contains an incitement to jihad, whose actions include raping women in the middle of the street, killing foreign tourists in the name of their vision of the world, it would seem to me that there is no possibility for negotiation with that force. Because that force has not adopted the language of diplomacy. That force has adopted the language of eternal warfare. Jihad is a spiritual malady on the minds of men that convinces them that the things of the world, that means physical force, are the things of God. And I'm a Christian, I'm not trying to preach any of you, but I'm a Christian. But the things of God are not the things of the world. Christ said, blessed are the peacemakers. The things of God are higher than the things of the world. War is a worldly invention that is sometimes necessary, but in most cases leads to endless suffering. But in this case, if Israel does not wage war against this force that has stalled peace time and time and time again, and is not even a legitimate national force, it's just a group of Arabs that have taken a geographical designation and tried to appropriate it to their own ends, then Israel will cease to exist as a people. More innocents will die. Justice requires a fierce recognition of what is right. And what is occurring in Israel right now is not at all right. Very simply, my friends, that's why I personally am happy to provide moral support for Israel. That's why I personally say that I stand with Israel. Not because I support foreign aid, not because I want to keep funding quagmires around the globe, but because I understand the implications of what is happening. And because I don't view the world through a power dynamic. Here, think about the leftists as this. They accept the false premise of occupation and then reduce the situation to a conflict between a bigger power and a smaller power. And they might even say, well, if a bigger power comes along and tries to say that to a smaller power that they have no claim to their land, takes it away from them, isn't that wrong? But in our reality, as I mentioned before, the Palestinians have no claim to land, number one. And number two, the Palestinians, or whatever, the Arabs in that area, have been used as a proxy by the big Arab powers like Iran to destroy Israel, who they have opposed since day one. This is not the case of some innocent little tribe being exploited by the evil Israelis. This is a case of Arab powers that don't like Jewish people, that have hated Jewish people for a very long time, that when they, in years past, invaded Jerusalem in the ancient times, used to kill Jews in the street. This is a case of them using this as a proxy war to keep Israel on its feet and to ultimately ensure its destruction. That's why Hezbollah is fighting Israel as well. One of the reasons why they're fighting Israel. So personally, if you ask me, there is a clear moral authority in this contest. It's not to say that Israel is perfect. Israel is not perfect. There are things that Israel has done that I'm sure are not good and that need to be corrected and need to be talked about. But just because you have sins, this is not a contest. Just because you have sins does not absolve the sins of your neighbor. Everyone must be evaluated on their own terms. And to be frank with you, my friends, I am tired of seeing the world viewed through worldviews that don't help human potential flourish. I am tired of seeing the world view through power and through proportion. People will oftentimes say that Israel has killed as many civilians as Hamas. But here's the thing about proportion. Proportion can't tell you why something happened. Proportion and statistics and numbers only tell you what happened. And in the absence of a holistic worldview that takes into account philosophical analysis and history, you cannot truly give a rational assessment of any given conflict. There's always two sides to a story. And if we then conclude, as evidence shows, that Hamas has a penchant for using civilians as meat shields to make Israel seem like a terrorist state, then what more can we say other than the fact that Israel's hand has been provoked, and when their hand is provoked, there's propaganda efforts used to demonize them. Park that for a moment. Consider that for a moment. But here's the point, my friends. Regardless of whether you agree with me or not, one thing is clear. The barbarism of old world mentalities and worldviews that conflates human servitude to the transcendent with violence and force, the mediocre things of this world, are very simply incorrect. They are anti-Western, and they are beliefs that should be opposed, and opposed fully with the full might of anyone who cares about the ideas that helped constitute the greatest civilization known to this world. That's why I support Israel morally. That's why I oppose Hamas. And that's why I am more than willing to say this in front of all of you, regardless of the barbs and the arrows that are thrown my way, because the truth matters more than my own personal comfort. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. Be sure to, if you want to, you can donate to me, you can comment on the video, you can share the video, you can join my Discord community if you have any questions or just want to argue with me, because everyone wants to argue with me these days. that's how the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. But I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.